Sanjay has also been a judge for the Architectural Review Awards, UK Dezeen Awards, UK the Plan Awards Italy, Inde Awards Australia, and has been a speaker at several international and national conventions. Sanjay is a member of several professional organizations like RIBA, SARA, IIA, and IIID. He is also involved with the Heritage Conservation Committee in New Delhi. His firm, which has 108 employees, focuses on the developing design solutions that fit the context and are environmentally friendly. They're passionate about creating spaces that challenge how we see and experience them, always exploring new design approaches.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to all of you, and we'll very quickly get into it. So these projects are all contextual responses, and you'll see how in each case, different scales of projects, different typologies have responded to the climate and the site, and they generally become spaces that make places in the true sense. So the first project is called Ras Houses, which is situated in Rajasthan. This was a low-rise housing project. So the entire site is 100 acres, and within this site, in the yellow marked space, is where we located this low-level housing. So the site on a whole has a contour difference of about 16 meters, with some portions high and some portions low. And the frontal portion is the public area, and this is a Google image of the housing as it was done. So we took the whole queue from organic cities, which are actually unplanned and which are far more interesting to traverse and experience across the world, whether it's in India, in Pakistan, in Italy, or wherever, rather than pure geometry. So this is a blow up of an organic city, the way the layout is in Jodhpur. And you see how the paths move. So the paths are not in single straight lines. The paths move, they expand somewhere, they contract somewhere, and there are spaces which become gathering spaces in between. So that's the kind of character we wanted to get into this housing. And one of the first calls we got from the site engineer was that by the time you finish designing, in the meantime, can we please level the site? So we said, please don't level the site. We don't want any of the contours to be disturbed. So this is the way we did it, where one enters at a higher level and then you keep moving across, and there is literally no cutting and filling. In 100-acre site, not a single spade of mud or soil was taken out or brought in. So this is the overall layout, which has a mix of guest houses, studio housing, and hostels, along with some common facilities between all of them. So the parking area is all along a perimeter road in the entire site. And then after you get off from the parking, you just traverse through open corridors linking all these units together. So these are floor plans. And this is a detail of how it works. So in every direction, each apartment or studio opens up into a sheltered terrace space. And then all of these gradually step back simultaneously. So literally every floor plan and every point of the site is completely different. So instead of making a typical building, which is what the client expected, they wanted one unit and they thought they'll just repeat it all over. Instead of that, we had to do something like at least about 60 times more work than what was required for a single unit. But the end result was something that was very interesting, where you see each one of these blocks, the way it is masked, everything steps back and opens into shelter spaces at every level. So these are only ground plus two structures, but you see how it steps back along the side, it steps back in both different directions. So these are sections through the site and simultaneously looking at the plans and the overall layout, which is completely organic. So as a result of this, you see different views from each part wherever you go, and all of the landscape is kept natural, and we've literally planted on the existing contours. So you get these different views from every point wherever you are. And as a result, every unit also feels completely identifiable on its own. So somewhere the contours are high, somewhere the contours are low, somewhere the half building sits right on top of the contours and then steps down, somewhere it gradually falls down with the contours. So you get this very interesting mix of spaces, of built spaces, sheltered spaces, and open spaces, constantly changing throughout. These are the public amenity buildings which connect as a hub, as a focal point towards common to all the residential units. And there are large play spaces like this, which are created with sheltered pergolas so that in the hot summers, when it's 40 degrees as it is now, one can still use them. So these are the open corridors. And then taking a cue from the colors of Rajasthan, the way people in Rajasthan use color, whether it's their turban or their shoes or their clothes, we've incorporated those same colors within the corridor so that every corridor is identifiable on its own. And plus, it becomes interesting to walk down. So there's an orange corridor, it turns to yellow, then it turns to red, and different floors have different color combinations. So at each point, you feel a sense of identity and immediate relation to where your unit is within. And whenever you're walking through, you get this different composition of open spaces which surround you. Built very sustainably with fly ash bricks, a lot of sheltered spaces, complete open circulation spaces. The buildings are extremely energy efficient. And all these buildings run on the residual energy which is released from the cement plant which is close by. So this entire project, the housing project, was built for a cement plant to house all the people who work there. So there is no energy being taken from the grid. It all comes from the residual energy which is released during production. So this is a bridge which cuts across a natural reservoir within the entire 100-acre site. So we, like I said earlier, did not cut any of the contours and we created all these sheltered spaces. Now this, in contrast, is a single office building, which is located in a place called Raipur, in the state of Chhattisgarh in India. So here again, it's the same client but a different location where within the cement plant factory space, we had to create a production office building for them. Now the site was trapezoidal. And if you look at the orientation, the longest side was towards the north. So we first looked at the possibility of making something low rise and looking at the client's requirements, the footprint works out to only 63 by 63 meters. But when you make a building which is 63 meters deep, then there's no natural light penetration because natural light penetrates only up to a depth of 8 meters. So we decided let's do a courtyard. When you do a courtyard, which is the way traditional planning has been done in all hot climates, it is conducive to passive cooling. But at the same time, a regular courtyard looks the same from every single direction. So it's very static. All the traditional buildings have this. So the upside is passive cooling, but the downside is that wherever you are within this courtyard, it looks the same. So we then made the courtyard also trapezoidal. So it corroborates to the site shape. And at the same time, it becomes far more interesting. And then to make it even more interesting, we started bending it in portions. Now, by bending it in portions, what happens is if you look at Fatehpur Sikri or any of these really buildings with large courtyard spaces, because the building is only ground plus one, there is a very little perimeter that gets shaded. And the majority of the courtyard is full of sun, and you cannot actually go there during the daytime. So, by squeezing the courtyard and making it smaller, we've ensured that the shadow of the building permanently is over 50% of the courtyard space. So that courtyard then starts getting utilized throughout the day. And it's not just a courtyard just for the look and passive cooling. So here again, taking a cue from the organic cities where no path was direct and straight, the path now meanders around this bent courtyard space, offering different views from different angles. And then to facilitate further airflow, what we've done is picked up the building in the middle and allowed the air to flow through and through this courtyard. At the same time, that also becomes an entrance space for the building. And then in addition, we've provided a set of metal louvers which are rotatable so that depending upon the sunlight direction, one can change the angle of these louvers so you can actually regulate the amount of light that you need within the office space. So this is the floor plan. It's just a ground plus one building. So that's the ground floor plan with a cafeteria at one end and a gymnasium at the other end at the two pointed points. And at the first floor level where all there are research labs and offices. And these are cross sections through the building. So at every point, the section shows how the building changes dramatically. So this is the entry point. So the building, instead of having a canopy or a kind of space which protrudes from the building in itself lifts up and, in a way, invites people to just walk into it. And that's a close up of the entry point. And this is the point where the building lifts up and there's a gymnasium below with a shallow pool of water for passive cooling. These are the garden spaces that surround the building. So at every angle, at every point, this building is perceived totally different in terms of its geometry and in terms of the way it sits on the side. That's the cafeteria at the other end, which again opens up into a pool of shallow water for passive cooling, allowing people in the cafeteria to simply walk out and sit around the water body in the evenings. So the building twists and turns along this side. That's the cement factory that you can see at the back. And the vertical lines are all these metal aerofoil shaped louvers which direct the sunlight in. So you can face them towards the north and get indirect sunlight throughout the day. So that's the courtyard. You can see even now that there is a certain amount which is in shadow. So always, because of its close, the walls being closer, the courtyard is usable throughout the day. So this is the cafeteria space from the inside, opening up towards the water body on the outside. And what the users of this building, after 2 years of operation, have come back as a feedback and said, our whole idea was that because this is a very, very remote location, this location is 2.5 hours away from the closest city. So it's literally in the middle of nowhere. And the client initially, when they started, they said, why do you want to make such a complicated building? So these are the research labs inside. They said it's not about being complicated. It's about creating something that is different and unique to experience. So because people are staying 2 hours away from a city and they don't have any other life, this office should be the kind that you don't want to leave. It should have ample light, but that light should be controllable. It should be indirect light. So the working conditions are very good. The cafeteria, the gymnasium, all the public spaces open up nicely to the outdoors. So it becomes a hub and people want to stay in this building. So these are the louvers, which are all around the building to regulate the sunlight. Again, here, everything was built with fly ash bricks. And the louvers orient all of the light towards the north. So you get indirect sunlight throughout the day. There is no need for blinds, curtains, or anything within this office space. All the rainwater is harvested, recycled, and reused. So this is what the client was expecting, and this is the brief that they had given us, the top images, that this is the way we build, our cement factory buildings. What is the need for you to make something so complicated? But at the end, they've all appreciated because everyone who works here loves the building and loves being there, and their work output has actually increased. So in that sense, it was a successful building. The building responds to its site and takes traditional cues, but uses them in a different manner. So this is a third project. This is a very small house. I mean, of course, small depends on multiple factors, but this is a house of 8,000 square feet on a plot of only 500 square meters, so 5,000 square feet. So this is in a city called Bhilwara in Rajasthan, where temperatures right now are 40 degrees plus. So it's extremely hot. And the site is located in a large residential colony where all these individual bungalows are there, like literally 300 of them all around. So we had a corner site on two roads. And we first started looking at how can you, this entire house was built during COVID. And here in Bhilwara, the COVID had not permeated to that extent because it is more of an open space. It's not a very urbanized city. And we looked at getting all the materials from the nearby vicinity. So all of the walls in this are made by adobe bricks, Vedic bricks, made on site. And then lime plaster, which is a local technique and is a natural cooling effect. It makes a difference of 7 degrees when you use it from the outside towards reducing the heat gain into the inside spaces, was used throughout the house. So when we started, it was like this. The footprint of the house based on the client's needs of 4 bedrooms plus a study plus a small gymnasium plus a family room plus a living room, dining room and kitchen, of course, necessitated that we need to go ground plus two. And then it was also based on their belief in Vastu that the master bedroom has to be in the southwest, the kitchen has to be in the southeast, and those parameters. So, with those parameters, we started looking at a different aspect of traditional architecture where arcades were used to reduce the heat gain into the buildings. So, you look at all these images on the left and the right, there are arcades around each space which reduce the heat completely. At the same time, they create a cool space to walk around. So here there's an entire envelope created throughout the office with interstitial spaces and sheltered spaces fronting each and every single room so that every room first opens out into this sheltered space and then beyond that into the garden space. So as a result of which there is a 15-degree difference from the outside to the inside without putting on any air conditioning inside the house. So the house responds to the climate in that sense. So all of these spaces that you see on the left are all sheltered outdoor spaces, and most of the spaces are oriented towards the north and the east. So this is the house seen from the road junction. And what we also did, we convinced the client that this whole paved area which is around, don't make a compound wall so that the because there's the garden strip left was very small. So you increase the garden by landscaping till the exterior curbstone and with no compound wall so that the house looks like it extends out up till the road. So the garden area got maximized by 2 times, and these are the floor plans. So even within this small house, there are three different volumes. So the living room is 1.5 floors high, the dining room is 2 floors high, and the rest of the rooms are all 4 meters high. So there is this constant change in volumes as one moves to the house. So you look at this section, you see a different player volume where there's a double height volume below and a single one on top. And then you see another section, you see a 1.5 floor volume, and then single volume on the other side. So at every point when you're traversing this house within, you get to see this different volume space, when you're going through. So these are views of the house, which is very, very sculptural. So it's literally like a whole curtain has been veiled around the entire house to create this envelope that is sheltered, mitigating heat gain completely. These are the inner spaces. So when you walk in towards the end of the corridor, there's a small pool of water. It's passive cooling, looking out to the outside, flanked by a family room. And then the stairway that goes through with the double height dining space on the opposite side. These are the sheltered spaces outside, the living room, family room, all connected on the outer side. And at the upper level, also, when the building steps back, there are sheltered terrace spaces because otherwise, if you have an open terrace in this climate, it is non usable for most of the year. It's a very small movie that will take you through the volumes within. The interior palette is purposely kept very, very simple, and everything has a natural feel to it. All the walls, interior, exterior, are all in line plaster. So the Mirai House was built very sustainably. It houses three generations within this building of ground plus two. It maximizes on the garden space. It reduces the heat gain into the building, and it's all built by local workers and local materials. This project is the street, which is an 800 room students hostel, which we had to finish in 8 months from design to execution. Now, this is the site. The red portion, which is a trapezoidal shape, is the site that we were given to construct these 800 hostel rooms for boys. And these are the buildings and the rest of the campus. So the chancellor of the university was expecting something like this. But if you walk through these hostel rooms, the ones that have already been constructed, rooms are literally looking into rooms at a distance of 6 meters. There is no privacy from room to room. And all of these are white blocks which are repetitive in nature and have no sense of belonging. So, I mean, a student, feels completely lost in these kind of blocks. So we looked at the site and the numbers that were required, and that's what actually translates because there was also this parameter that we had to build only ground plus three. So we looked at various ways of doing this and then finally decided that we need to do this in an organic way, completely different from the rest of the campus, make it far more interesting. So just like in an organic city, as I've said before, the roads don't go straight. Here, the buildings also don't go straight and they keep turning and twisting along the length of the plot. And this is the internal view. So even though the buildings are long, you have only 5 or 6 rooms before it takes a turn. And there is a breakout space created at every junction point. So that becomes a meeting point for students when they are together. And then the building turns and twists. And we looked at various ways to do this. And ideally, because we wanted all the rooms to face the north, and it's very difficult in a site of that size to have everybody facing the north. So if you were to twist the rooms, then you would need to provide balcony spaces, and there was a strict requirement of not providing balconies. So we finally settled on a plan which has straight rectilinear rooms, but each room has a bay window that twists and opens up towards the north. And this simple thing has actually created a huge amount of difference in the amount of heat that comes into the building. These buildings are almost naturally cool throughout the year. And then the gymnasium, the cafeteria, the public games room, etc., become focal hubs at two different points within this site. So these are the way the junctions are. So the roads, the within circulation goes straight, turns around, goes straight again. And that's the overall site plan. So every space is different in dimension in terms of scale. So somewhere it's larger, somewhere it's narrow, somewhere it widens up. And by doing this, you can look at the shadow created by the building. Again, here, whether it's morning or evening, 50% of that garden space is in shadow. And as a result of which, students can sit in that garden even though it is 35 to 40 degrees outside because it is still cool. And this is the way every hostel room twists towards the north. And then within the soffits, we created a color so that there is an identity created. So instead of doing something that is 100% repetition the way all the hostels were created earlier, here that color helps you identify the block that you are in with just a subtle hint. So these are the site elevations and sections, which constantly again change throughout. Now here is the front view. So towards the front on the northern side, there is a large playground, and this is the largest playground within the campus. And this is where everybody plays games once the studies are over during the evening times. And these are the spaces within as one walks through. So the large volumes that you see are the gymnasium and the games room and the cafeteria, and it forms a large open auditorium of steps facing the north, which is used by the students on every evening. So this again is a close-up of the games room and cafeteria towards the rear. So there's one towards the rear and one towards the center. And in both cases, so all these spaces are used by these students. And the interesting thing is, while we were talking to students, we found that, there were a number of students who came to us and said that this is our happy place in the entire 100-acre campus because this is where we come every evening. So even though it's an 800-room boys hostel, the girls, boys from the entire university congregate here every evening simply because these are the only buildings in the campus that have some color, they have some life, there are a lot of shadows created. You can sit out in the open in the garden simply because the way they are designed and laid out. So these are multiple views which constantly change throughout wherever you are. It's the gym area, the cafeteria space, and all of this was done very economically. We actually finished these buildings in a cost of 1,500 rupees a square foot, architecture, interior, everything included with the furniture. And it was a real challenge for us because we were given only 8 months to finish the entire project. But the result is very interesting. So you can see how the buildings narrow down in portions and then they widen up. And at every point, and this photograph is taken in the afternoon with people sitting in the garden happily when it was 36 degrees. So it's very interesting spaces throughout, very low cost project, done very quickly, but still remains one of our favorite projects to go back to and see because people enjoy it so much. So this is the way the bay windows are being used. So the students sitting there and studying and looking out towards the north. And this north orientation of all these wedge windows has made the project like very, very energy efficient. In fact, the project started without the air conditioning main systems having come in, and it was during the summer in June, and the students found that the air conditioning was not required even in the hot summer months. So that in itself was a huge compliment to us that the buildings were created in such a way that you did not need air conditioning even in the hottest month. Now, this is a house that we did in Lucknow. So Lucknow in Uttar Pradesh in India, this is the site. So it's based on a very large arterial road. And normally any client would have expected that you build the house facing the main arterial road. But that main arterial road happens to be on the southern side of the plot. And by orienting the house towards the south, it would have been a disaster in terms of heat gain. And at the same time, the sound of that arterial road would have been constantly coming within the house. So we looked at this in terms of orientation and then decided that rather than building the building footprint the way the client wanted, we'll do the exact reverse. Move the building towards the south, create the garden on the northern side, which is the sheltered and the quieter side, and orient all the rooms towards that side so that two things. You don't get the noise from the arterial road, and at the same time, the north orientation gives you heat mitigation and much better energy efficiency. So this was the kind of block. And then we started with a simple courtyard, but then we started fragmenting that and creating it more interestingly, where there is split up the ground floor into volumes, which allow air circulation throughout. And then at the same time, the first floor again steps back in some portions, creating garden spaces on the top. So the whole building becomes a very interesting juxtaposition of open, enclosed, and sheltered spaces. And then the inner court is also covered because there is a lot of dust, a lot of pollution. So we've only circulated the air from the clear story that is created from the terrace level with skylights and the perimeter circulation, perimeter walls of screens. So this is the floor plan. When one enters, there is this large courtyard with a shallow pool of water. And then the rooms are situated all along. The main orientation is all towards the north on the left hand side. And the water provides for passive cooling. At the first floor level, you see how gardens have been incorporated in each part. So there are terraces and gardens. And then right on the top, the terrace is again accessible with solar panels and the atrium roof. So these are cross sections with filtered light coming in through each part and hot air being allowed to escape out. And this is the house as is seen. Now, this is the first view from the southern side. So literally the house turns its back onto the main road in a sense. And all of these are GFRC screens with a design derived from the Lucknow chicken embroidery work that Lucknow is famous for. And these screens envelop all these volumes, reduce the heat gain, and reduce the sound from the main road that the house sits on. So the entire house is seen as a composition of exposed concrete with these GFRC screens. Very interesting and very different from every single direction. And only towards the north, the house completely opens up towards the garden space. So these are views from all the sides with the composition constantly changing and these kind of volumes which are there as open air extensions to each room, sheltered decks, and then a whole skin in rooms which don't have a shelter deck has this whole plantation space so that again the plantation and the screen together reduce the heat as well as the noise into the house. That's the main courtyard space with hot air being allowed to escape from the top clear story and the double height living room beyond. And these are the interior spaces, the dining space, the outdoors when you step out into the garden. And again, a very small video on the house. Do we have time or are we running out?
So we are good.
Okay. And now this is the last project for today, which is something that we completed just 3 months back, really close to heart. It's built in Rajasthan and it's a community center. So this is our site. The site is literally surrounded only by sand and sand dunes and shallow hills, and it's a complete desert with very few trees and very little plantation. And the owner's house is what you see as Padam Palace in the Google image. So these people, the Kuleria family, wanted to build a memorial for their father. So that's the location, the site, and here are the views. So this is their house, and right adjacent to that is a location where they did the last rites of their father, Padmaramji Kolaria, and they wanted to build a small memorial for him. And when they came to me, they came with this idea that a memorial is going to be something like this, which is like a small temple where, people will just go and offer blessings. I mean, not offer like a tribute. So we said that this is a very typical thing to do. And in fact, this was a sketch that they got from somebody also. So we started looking at how you can actually build some space around this rather than just making a small enclosure. So we looked at various options and then finally decided that it would be nice if it literally like you have a garden space and the garden kind of flows up onto the terrace space, it swirls around and creates a community space within. And instead of enclosing the place where the last rites were, you actually open it up so that people can sit there and congregate and have multiple functions there. So this was our approach to starting it. And prior to doing that, we studied all the schools in the area. And these are some of those schools. So they are built in this very makeshift way. While they have classrooms, they don't have playgrounds, they don't have libraries. And we looked at this project as an opportunity to create something for the village children of all the surrounding villages. So this region, Nokha region in Rajasthan, has 145 villages, and Silwa, where this is located, is the 145th. So, not just for Silwa, for the 144 villages around, we wanted to create a community space, a learning space, a playing space, and looked at this as an opportunity to do all of that. Now, one more thing is that people don't have access to gardens here because of the climate. To maintain a garden is very, very cumbersome. Because A, you need water, you need constant watering, and there is a lot of sunlight. It is right now it is 42 degrees there. And then there's no municipal corporation or village panchayat that is going to take care of public garden spaces. But because this is a private home, so the only people who have gardens are people with large private homes there, which are very few. So this was an opportunity to create a garden for the community as well. So although it is expensive to maintain a garden here, all the maintenance of the garden is done by recycled water from the house. All of that is recycled water used, and then all the rainwater is harvested. And all of this water is actually coming from bore wells in the region. So there is enough subsoil water, but it takes a lot of maintenance. So the highest portion of this 9-meter high structure has a library below, and the lowest portion has a small museum dedicated to the father's story. So these are the floor plans. Very, very simple. Towards the left, we've kept a long cafeteria space and large stores and bathrooms for the number of visitors who would come. And towards the right is the circular form within which there is a small museum space and a library space. And the central portion becomes an open auditorium space. And the rooftop becomes a spiral garden. So you walk up from one side and then you turn around and walk down from the other side with a large viewing gallery at the highest point. So that's the cross section. And this is the longitudinal section. And this is the way the building has been completed over the period of last 18 months. So it's surrounded by this garden, and that same garden gradually goes up the slope so people can climb up and down. And what you see as the linear block is the cafeteria and the public facilities. Now, on the southern side, this is completely earthbound in response to the climate again, and the earthworm gradually goes down on the east and the west, and towards the north is where it's completely open. So the central courtyard space faces the north, by virtue of which there is some portion of it always in shadow, as you will see later on, and the south is completely protected from any kind of heat gain. So I was here just 4 days ago. It was 39 degrees outside, and I walked into the library and it was absolutely cool with no air conditioning, not a single fan on. So if one addresses what the climate is and responds to direction and the location in the correct way, I think one can make buildings which are extremely energy efficient and don't need to rely on artificial lighting or air conditioning. So that's an aerial view, and this is a view at sunrise time, and this is towards the rear. So that's the south side berm. And below the spiral is the museum space, and the museum is lit by these scooped skylights within the earth berm. That's the central open auditorium space, which is used by about 400 people on a daily basis ever since it was opened to the public 3 months back. So people use it for going up the garden. School children are using the library, the auditorium. So this high portion is the library, and all of this is done with sandstone screens, which have been constructed there on site. So in this project, all the material used, the sandstone is available locally within a few kilometers. The workers and craftsmen are all from the region. Not a single material came from outside anywhere. So everything was within a few kilometers radius of this site. That's a view from the north with the library door 22 feet high. And this is the museum space lit by those skylit scoops. And that's the library space. So the library space always has this filtered light throughout the day, which constantly changes depending upon the sunlight direction. And these are villagers using the space for a music festival, not a music festival, but a music performance. So these spaces are being used throughout the day in multiple places, multiple ways. So the building is only 9,000 square feet and actually exemplifies how just creating a small footprint can actually generate such a large amount of public space. Because 9,000 square feet is the built up area of the building, but you have 9,000 square feet of garden on the rooftop, which is used. You have 27,000 square feet of open auditorium, which is used. So it literally becomes that this 9,000 square feet is being used 5 times more in terms of the actual space. Now, this is a small movie, just 2 minutes on the building. So that was the last project. Thank you very much for your attention. And once again, thank you very much for inviting me to speak to all of you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your thought provoking presentation and for sharing your architectural journey with us. We have a house full, and many more have joined in on our Insta Live, especially to hear from you and see your work. We would like to take a few questions from the audience and open the floor for questions with our moderator, Architect Fariha Amjad Ubaid.
Okay.
Hello. First, Sanjay, a very warm assalamu alaikum to you from Karachi. And what a dilemma it is, a packed audience, but so near to us in Mumbai, shared history, proximity in geography. But yeah, we are far away. And a lot of these projects, probably many of us would probably never visit. So some of us were wondering about the people's response to your projects, especially the first one. I think in the last 2 or 3 works, we saw a lot of interaction. So we're wondering about the first one, and then at least I was thinking about the limitation of architectural presentations in capturing the essence of, the real essence of these really people locales. So one is that I liked you to respond to that. Yeah, thank you.
So your question is the response of the people to the first one, the Ras Houses project?
Yes, the Rajasthan houses.
You cannot believe the response to that. So I'll tell you, those are the first buildings we made in that 100-acre site. And the owner of the company, it's like a very big thing because it's a huge listed company called Shree Cement. And the owner personally called and said, Sanjay, like, ye aapne kya kiya hai? Matlab, what have you done in this project? I said, why? So he said, for the first time in our history, we have built so many townships. People want to move to this township even though the school is not opened, even though the temple is not made, even though there's no club, no facility. So we are wondering that why do people want to move here? And then everybody has said that it's because of the way the buildings are designed that is much better than any other earlier places. So that was the reaction. So people actually wanted to move here with no facilities just to live in those buildings. And they're really happy there.
Okay, so do we have questions from the audience? I'm going to go there. And I was also wondering further, do we have one? Do we have one? Komal? Yeah. Okay. So, okay. Also, I wanted to share something with you that despite your prolific career and, of course, these very interesting works, many of us here in this hall, many of us were actually not very familiar with Sanjay Puri before they announced you as a speaker for this conference. So then, of course, we went to our Google source, and at least I was curious about how working with Hafiz Contractor and then his link with Terrestra Architects, how that came to influence some of your works in terms of their outputs, not just in terms of the process that you learned from all of these masters.
Okay, so basically, what I learned there is to look at something comprehensively, come up with a solution that is fast and that responds, and be final in your design. In the sense that whatever thinking you need to do, you do it in the initial stages itself and don't, keep changing your mind later on and later on when the project is in progress, because then that takes a toll on not just the client, the project costs, the contractors and everybody concerned. So whatever you need to do it fast and do it in the beginning and do it well at that time itself. So that was the most important takeaway. The styles are very, very different. So that's very different.
Yeah, that was interesting for us because probably the process is very similar in terms of a deeper quest into excellence, but the manifestation of that comes out very differently in all of these three works. So we'll go to Komal. Komal, can we have your question, please?
Yes. Hello, Sanjay. Your
Ah.
first three projects were really related to the context. And this is my question, that you were thinking about material and you were thinking about the landscape, you were thinking about the climate. And in your last project, you had the desert as the context of that place. And your design turned out to be like a grassy space, which was absolutely in contrast to the context. So I want to know how you sort of deviated from your initial sort of thought process from your projects to that, totally in contrast to the context.
So yeah, I mentioned it while presenting, but I'll elaborate more. These villagers and village children have no access to a green space. There is no garden where they can go to simply because gardens require too much maintenance and no public panchayat body or anybody wants to take care of that much maintenance. So here we suggested to the client that if you have this grass covered roof, it does two things. Yes, it is in stark contrast to the surroundings, but what it does is it cools the internal volume A, and B, it actually provides a public garden space. So the clients agreed and they are taking care of this maintenance. And if you see the look on children's faces when they run barefoot on this grass, because they've never done it, they don't have the opportunity to even
Hold it
ever
for 2
go
seconds.
on a grass surface.
Then just leave it.
So that's the whole reason it was done. It was done to give them something that they don't have. These are village children who don't have access to any garden. They're only surrounded by this sandy, surroundings all throughout the time. So they just come here and they can't believe that there's actual grass and they can run up this grass and they can feel cool. The feet feel cool. So they're all enjoying it. So yes, it is in sharp contrast, but it was specifically done that way.
So are there any more questions? Especially, yeah. So after this one, we'd like to go to the back of the room.
Hello, my name is Abdullah. Big fan of your work. I've
Thank
been
you.
following your work for quite some time. As you go through your projects, they have a very sculptural quality. At the same time, the brief appears to me that some of the brief has come from you. So usually in a typical scenario, we would take notes or the brief from the client. Do you create parts of the brief as you go along into the project? Like, do you create the program as you go along? Do you create ideas that are fixed into the program for the client as you go along? Or do you take those notes mostly from the client? Thank you.
Okay, so that's a very interesting question and very pertinent too. We take the brief as something which is just a starting point. And then once you've understood that brief, you know at the back of your mind that, yeah, this is their requirement. But then you keep that like it's a parallel line somewhere. And at the same time, you're looking at the site and how you can best do something in the best way, in the most interesting way in that particular site. And then simultaneously you incorporate those clients' requirements within it, but you have to go beyond. So yes, it is always going beyond the client's briefs in a huge way to achieve something that is, very different to perceive and to experience. So the client, otherwise, if you just keep the client's brief in front of you and say, yeah, this is my mantra, and then you will actually not be able to expand beyond that. So the client's brief is kept because obviously it is the client and they are going to have a brief and that is the requirement. But you don't give it that much importance. You just say that this is like the max of the project. Now let's get to the creative aspect. So I don't know if I'm being clear. So, it's just like that simple, like these are the guidelines, but the way you tell the story is yours and find some way to tell it in an interesting way and incorporate that within it. Sounds
So
gone.
at the end, is there any other question? So the thing about these conferences is that the best questions always happen in the tea break and in the meeting time that we have at other moments. So I think there's one here.
Hi, Sanjay. My name is Umar Farooq, and it was a great presentation, very interesting work. My
Thank you very
question
much.
is regarding this threat of climate change. And we know it's going to be difficult to turn back the degrees. And I think the future is going to be about how we survive it. So how are the Indian architects responding to it? Or they're just waiting for the worst to happen and then they will respond? So is there a proactive approach towards this whole situation? Thank you.
So as time goes, yes, every architect is becoming aware and more concerted efforts are being taken by a number of people. So I can't say for all, but there are a large number of people out there who are taking very serious cognizance of the carbon footprint, how to reduce it, alternative materials. Like, I'll tell you my example. 10 years back, we were not thinking like this. But today we're doing this house right now, it is completely in Adobe. We're doing another structure, another community center, which has got bamboo being used as in place of steel reinforcement right from the foundation. So there is no steel at all. Again, there also the bricks are all adobe. The roof is entirely in bamboo. So wherever we have the opportunity, we are making sure that you convince the client and go for more sustainable materials, better ways of working, using labor and materials from around the site so that you don't increase the carbon footprint. So, but there are a lot of people who are taking this effort. But yes, a lot more needs to be done.
Any other question? Any comment? Yeah, there's one at the back. Shabana. Yeah, this is the last one, yes.
Good afternoon. It's a comment, basically. I find that the design that you have done has lots of beautiful screens to it. And the designs of the screens and the motifs are there. So that's really something very, you can say, typical or very much identifying your style, if I may say so. Even the walls that are going in the arch bungalow, it was like a screen wall going all around, creating a very nice ambience to the whole space. So this envelope that you come up with, what is that, you can say, inspiration or idea that have a contrast screening or totally cover the building? So I would like to just hear your feedback on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so the envelope, as we say, whether it's in a form of a stone screen or just in the arched house or sheltered arcade, has basically come from reducing the heat gain and creating an interstitial space. It comes from there. Otherwise, you can do a window and you can do a large overhang. So that's about it. But by doing these screens, you are really reducing the heat by a huge amount, and we've seen it happen. Like I said, this community center, I walked into this library just literally 4 days back, and it was 39, 40 degrees outside. And I'm surprised there are children sitting there. There's no fan, there's no AC, nothing is on, and it's absolutely fine. You don't need it. So that's the kind of difference it can make.
So thank you very much, Sanjay. At the end, I would just like to request you for one message to all of the young architects and students at the back of the room. who've been silent probably in the short time that we had, but any message that you'd like to convey to them?
You need to go out and experience spaces on your own, the real spaces, okay? Don't rely on social media, don't rely on photographs. If you find a building interesting, you need to go and visit and sit there and experience what that space does, what is the light penetration. Only then you will get a true understanding of volume, of elements, of how they differ, and what that difference is going to create, whether for the better or for the worse. So it's all about real experience. So please get out of the social media thing and go and start experiencing reality, whatever it is, whether it's a building that was good historically or whether it's something that's created new, at any and every opportunity, go out there and actually experience those spaces. And if you have the opportunity, go to these larger conventions which are being held worldwide, like the Biennale in Venice and the World Architecture Festival, and so many more, which actually help you gain knowledge from multiple minds and multiple streams simultaneously, because those experiences will make a huge difference in the way you think and the way you will move forward. And there is no shortcut to, everybody today. I find that people want to start their own practice within 1 year and 2 years of getting out of college. It's not possible. Sometimes it takes 1 year for a building permission to come through. You have to spend anything from 5 to 10 years in an architect's office, go through a series of projects before you know enough to make an informed decision and start your own studio or your own practice. That's our message.
Thank you,
Thank you.
sir.